January 17th, 1944. Dawn breaks over the frigid North Sea. The air smells of fuel and oil. Engines roar in a tight humming formation. Hundreds of B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators, their silver fuselages glinting beneath the weak winter sun. At their flanks, the long noses of the P-51 Mustangs cut through clouds like steel knives, their Merlin engines thrumming with lethal precision. Below, the faint outline of Denmark disappears behind a mist of snow and fog. Somewhere ahead, over the heart of Germany, Berlin waits, a city fortified by flak towers, searchlights piercing the grey sky, and hundreds of Luftwaffe fighters on patrol. Pilots grip their controls, eyes scanning for flashes of enemy aircraft. In the cockpit, hands numb from cold, each man knows the stakes. The survival of the bombers, the destruction of enemy industry, the lives of thousands depending on their skill and speed. The first tracer-round streak across the sky, a deadly welcome. The dance between Mustang and Messerschmitt has begun, and the fate of the mission hangs in a fragile balance. By 1942, the skies over Europe had become a deadly chessboard. The Allied combined bomber offensive was in full swing, with B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators flying deep into German territory. The goal was clear: destroy the industrial heart of the Reich, cripple aircraft production, and shatter German morale. Daylight raids promised precision, but they came at a terrible cost. Bomber formations, tightly packed to concentrate defensive fire, were slow, lumbering targets. Enemy fighters, Messerschmitt, Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s were waiting. Anti-aircraft artillery, the infamous flak, turned the skies over Germany into a lethal maze. Initial missions into industrial regions like the Ruhr Valley and Cologne had shown the vulnerability of unescorted bombers. On a single raid in August 1943, the 8th Air Force lost nearly one-third of its bombers. Crews returned with frostbite, burns, and the haunting sight of comrades falling from the sky. Pilots learned the brutal calculus of survival. The odds were always against them. British forces, operating primarily at night, could strike German cities with relative impunity, but daylight bombing, favoured by the Americans for accuracy, meant facing the full fury of the Luftwaffe. The technological gap was stark. Early American fighters, like the P-38 Lightning and P-47 Thunderbolt, had limited range. They could escort bombers only as far as northern France or the Belgian border. Deep penetrations into the Reich remained perilous. Without long-range protection, bomber crews faced near-certain attrition over cities like Berlin. Strategists debated relentlessly. How could the Allies sustain pressure without decimating their own aircrews? Enter the P-51 Mustang, a single-engine fighter born from necessity and ingenuity. Equipped with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, it combined speed, maneuverability, and unprecedented range. For the first time, escort fighters could accompany bombers all the way to the heart of Germany and back. Commanders anticipated a tipping point. With the Mustang, bomber formations might finally survive the lethal gauntlet of German skies. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe, though experienced, was strained. By 1943, years of attrition and relentless Allied bombing had thinned their ranks. Veteran pilots were lost faster than they could be replaced. Fuel shortages limited training flights, yet they remained formidable. Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs were agile, heavily armed, and defended the Reich with fanatical determination. German commanders relied on radar-controlled fighter sweeps and flak batteries to disrupt bomber formations. Every engagement was calculated, every sortie a test of endurance, skill, and desperation. The stage was set for a new era in aerial warfare. P-51 Mustangs would not merely fly alongside bombers, they would challenge the Luftwaffe dominance, reshape the dynamics of escort strategy, and alter the calculus of survival for American aircrews. But this transformation would not come without blood. Each mission into Berlin, Hamburg, or Leipzig demanded precision, courage, and a cold understanding of the human cost. The Mustang promised protection, but the skies would judge whether technology alone could overcome experience, numbers, and the deadly instinct of German pilots defending their homeland. As winter descended over Europe in early 1944, the first long-range Mustang missions were ready to test the theory. Bomber crews, hardened by months of raids, glanced at their new escorts with cautious optimism. The Luftwaffe, aware of the Mustang's appearance, prepared to meet the threat with calculated aggression. The coming months would reveal whether the Mustang was a guardian angel or just another fleeting hope in the deadly calculus of the European air war. By early 1944, the Allied air war over Europe had evolved into a high-stakes contest of strategy, technology, and endurance. The United States 8th Air Force had shifted its focus to strategic daylight bombing, aiming at the industrial and transportation hubs that fueled the German war machine. Cities such as Berlin, Leipzig, and Hamburg became prime targets. Every sortie was meticulously planned. Bomber routes were calculated to avoid known flak concentrations, timing coordinated to exploit weather and cloud cover, and fighter escorts positioned to intercept Luftwaffe formations before they could engage. Berlin, the political and industrial heart of the Reich, was particularly well defended. The city's air defences combined layered radar detection, anti-aircraft artillery, and coordinated fighter squadrons. By 1944, the Luftwaffe had organised its forces into specialised Gruppen tasked with intercepting bomber streams. Pilots were trained in aggressive head-on attacks, designed to disrupt formations and destroy bombers before their payloads reached the city. Despite dwindling numbers, German aircrews relied on skill, surprise, and intimate knowledge of local terrain. Allied planners recognised the lethal challenge. Early missions without adequate escort had resulted in catastrophic losses, with up to 30% of bombers destroyed on deep penetration raids. The introduction of the P-51 Mustang changed this dynamic. Equipped with external fuel tanks, the Mustang could now accompany bombers all the way to Berlin and back, a capability unmatched by previous American fighters. Its speed, climb rate, and firepower allowed pilots to engage Luftwaffe fighters decisively, protecting the bomber formations while minimizing their own exposure. The first long-range escort missions were cautiously optimistic experiments. Mustang pilots flew in tight cover positions, shadowing the bombers and reacting instantly to enemy attacks. Training emphasized coordination. American pilots learned formation discipline, gunnery synchronization, and timing to avoid collisions in dense bomber formations. Communication was critical. A single lapse could leave bombers exposed. Commanders monitored every sortie, analyzing losses, enemy engagement tactics, and Mustang performance to refine escort doctrine. On the ground, German commanders quickly noted the appearance of the Mustang. Intelligence reports described a fighter that could match their aircraft in speed and altitude, with the range to penetrate deep into Reich territory. Luftwaffe tactics had to adapt. Intercepts required larger formations, more aggressive maneuvers, and careful timing to exploit any gaps in bomber defense. Experienced pilots were tasked with leading attacks, while replacements struggled to survive against increasingly coordinated Allied formations. Weather remained a constant variable. Units that lacked clear direction suffered higher losses, while those with disciplined command structures occasionally mounted effective counterattacks. The Luftwaffe faced a crisis of survival. By 1944, relentless bombing raids had thinned the ranks of veteran pilots. Fuel shortages and interrupted training programs produced less experienced replacements, often flying against the best-equipped bombers in history, now defended by long-range Mustangs. German pilots adapted. They shifted from head-on attacks to high-speed slashing maneuvers, sought stragglers at the edges of formations, and coordinated flak with fighter sweeps. Yet, the Mustang forced them into defensive action. Every encounter now carried heightened risk. A poorly timed maneuver could result in death, while the increasingly coordinated American formations left little room for error. Luftwaffe morale wavered under the psychological strain. Reports noted frustration at being drawn into dogfights with P-51s that could outrun, outclimb, or outturn their fighters. Even experienced aces recognized the changing balance of power. The skies over Berlin, once a theatre dominated by German skill, were now a contest in which attrition, fatigue, and technological parity favored the Allies. Air combat was as much mental as it was physical. Pilots faced constant awareness of mortality. Every sortie over Berlin presented the risk of flak tearing the fuselage, engine failure, or a stray enemy round ending a life mid-air. For bomber crews, survival depended on trust in their escorts, but also in luck and timing. Watching a fellow crewman fall from the sky left scars that letters home could never convey. For Mustang pilots, the psychological burden was complex. They were hunters and protectors, simultaneously seeking to destroy enemy aircraft while shielding fragile bombers below. Each engagement demanded split-second decisions, and hesitation could mean catastrophe. Fatigue compounded fear. After hours at extreme altitude, with cold seeping into bones and fingers stiffening on controls, human endurance was tested to its limits. Psychological impact extended beyond individual crews. Entire squadrons experienced shared trauma. Camaraderie mingled with grief. Letters and memoirs recount the silent understanding between men who had faced death together, and the lingering anxiety before each mission. The knowledge that every successful mission reduced future bomber losses provided some solace, but the cost was never abstract. Every encounter in the sky was personal, immediate, and brutally consequential. March 6, 1944. The winter sky over northern Germany was pale and brittle, streaked with grey clouds. The 8th Air Force dispatched 376 heavy bombers on a mission to Berlin, the industrial and political heart of the Reich. This time, every bomber carried a squadron of P-51 Mustangs on escort duty, their long noses slicing through the chill morning air. For the first time, the Luftwaffe would face a fully protected formation over its capital. As the bombers crossed the North Sea, the tension in the cockpit was palpable. Pilots scanned every shadow, every glint of sunlight on a distant wing. By mid-morning, radar stations in Berlin had already detected the incoming armada. German controllers scrambled fighters, Bf-109s from WWII 3 and FW-190s from WWII 26, launching intercepts in multiple waves. Overhead, searchlights probed the clouds, flak guns fired rhythmic bursts into the winter sky, and tracers streaked through the air like deadly veins. The first wave of Luftwaffe's dove on the bombers. Mustang pilots surged forward, climbing to meet the attackers. Dogfights erupted at 25,000 feet. Bf-109s twisted in the sky, firing short bursts, while Mustangs rolled, dived, and countered with deadly accuracy. American pilots reported seeing enemy aircraft torn apart, spiraling downward as tracer fire ripped fuselages and wings. Yet the danger was relentless. Every missed maneuver could expose a bomber. Every delayed response could cost a life. Within minutes, the battle escalated. Mustangs flew in V-shaped formations alongside bombers, peeling off to intercept attackers at the edges of the formation. Pilots coordinated through radio, calling out threats and targets, moving as a single living organism of steel and fire. For bomber crews, the Mustangs were shields, diving between enemy fighters and their vulnerable B-17s. Many gunners reported their first moments of real confidence, watching Mustangs chase off attackers before flak or bullets could reach them. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe adapted, trying to exploit gaps in coverage. FW-190s targeted stragglers and wingmen, while experienced Bf-109 aces attempted head-on attacks. The air became a chaotic theatre of speed, altitude, and firepower. Mustang pilots executed barrel rolls, high-speed dives, and tight turns, leveraging superior engine performance and maneuverability. At times, formations blurred into a swirl of smoke, fire, and tracer lines, each movement a matter of life or death. By noon, the battle had reached its turning point. Mustang squadrons, trained to anticipate German tactics, began dictating the pace of engagement. Enemy fighters, now forced onto the defensive, were either destroyed or driven off. Bomber formations, once vulnerable, advanced steadily toward Berlin, dropping payloads with precision. Flak bursts could not scatter them as effectively as before. With Mustangs intercepting attackers, bombers flew higher, tighter, and more confidently. The human stories were immediate and stark. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, a Mustang pilot in the 4th Fighter Group, recalled seeing a B-17 under heavy fire and diving into the enemy formation, forcing an FW-190 into a fatal spin. Across the formation, gunners cheered silently as Mustangs intercepted attackers, their presence a tangible barrier against destruction. Yet loss remained real. A handful of bombers were still shot down, crews forced to parachute into hostile territory. The cost was present, but survival rates had risen dramatically compared to previous unescorted missions. By mid-afternoon, the 8th Air Force had inflicted heavy damage on Berlin's industrial districts while sustaining significantly lower losses. Reports from the Luftwaffe noted the impact. Experienced pilots killed, aircraft destroyed, and morale eroding. The first full-scale deep-penetration Mustang Escort mission had succeeded in proving the principle American long-range fighters could dominate the skies over the Reich, protecting bombers and shifting the strategic balance. The skies cleared as the bombers turned for home. Pilots were exhausted, fingers numb, eyes raw from the constant scanning of clouds and tracers. But the mission had changed the calculus of air war. The Mustang had emerged not just as a protective escort, but as a decisive factor in the Allied air offensive, a tool capable of imposing air superiority over the heart of Germany. March 24, 1944. Overcast skies cloaked northern Germany in grey. The 8th Air Force dispatched over 450 heavy bombers to Berlin, escorted by more than 200 P-51 Mustangs. The Luftwaffe, aware of previous raids and the new threat, scrambled every available interceptor. This mission would test whether the Mustang could sustain dominance against concentrated German resistance. From the moment the bombers crossed the North Sea, the sky became a theatre of controlled chaos. Radar stations in Berlin tracked the incoming formations, directing waves of Bf-109s and FW-190s to intercept. Anti-aircraft batteries, bristling along the outskirts of the city, began firing in synchronized bursts. Flak bursts shredded clouds into curtains of black smoke, each explosion a potential tomb for the bomber crews below. Mustang pilots surged forward, executing precision maneuvers learned through months of practice. They intercepted attackers at long range using boom and zoom tactics, diving at high speed, opening fire, then climbing to safety before enemy gunners could react. Formation discipline was critical. Even a single Mustang out of position could expose a bomber. Across the sky, pilots relied on split-second decisions and mutual trust, their actions choreographed as if by instinct. German pilots fought with desperate skill. Veteran aces, aware of their diminishing numbers, attempted concentrated attacks on the bomber flanks. Yet for the first time they faced a foe capable of engaging them on equal terms at any altitude. Many Bf-109s were forced into evasive action, their attacks disrupted by Mustang squadrons that moved like a single lethal organism across the sky. The human cost, however, remained tangible. A B-24 struck by flak began to plummet, crew parachuting into hostile territory. On a nearby Mustang, Lieutenant James Red Harrison reported seeing an enemy aircraft spiralling out of control after his squadron's concentrated fire. Pilots faced a dual reality. Each encounter brought exhilaration, proof of mastery and teamwork, yet reminded them of the razor-thin margin between survival and death. As the bombers approached Berlin's industrial core, the P-51s expanded their defensive perimeter. They forced Luftwaffe fighters into defensive maneuvers, breaking cohesion in enemy formations. The combination of speed, range, and firepower allowed Mustang pilots to dominate the engagements, systematically reducing threats before bombers could release their payloads. Factories, rail yards, and fuel depots were targeted with precision, the destructive power of the Allied air offensive reaching deeper into the Reich than ever before. By mid-mission, Luftwaffe pilots reported heavy losses. Experienced aces were downed or forced to retreat, leaving inexperienced replacements exposed. Coordination broke down as German formations became fragmented under relentless Mustang pressure. Commanders struggled to direct fighters in real time against a numerically and technologically superior enemy. The balance of power in the skies over Berlin had shifted decisively. Back in the bomber formations, gunners and navigators watched as Mustangs intercepted attackers. Confidence replaced the fear that had defined earlier raids. Pilots could focus on navigation, bomb release and formation maintenance rather than constant panic over enemy attacks. The Mustang's presence did not eliminate danger. It never would, but it transformed the probability of survival. The mission concluded with over 85% of bombers returning safely. The Luftwaffe had lost nearly 70 aircraft in combat, with dozens more damaged. Intelligence reports noted the psychological effect. German pilots were now cautious, less willing to engage directly, and increasingly aware of the Mustang's lethal capabilities. Commanders on both sides recognized the pivotal truth: the air war over Germany had changed. The Mustang was no longer a supporting actor. It had become the decisive force enabling the Allied bombing campaign. Subsequent missions reinforced the pattern. Mustangs continue to escort bombers, systematically degrading Luftwaffe effectiveness. German fighter losses mounted, experienced pilots dwindled, and operational strategy increasingly shifted to defensive measures and avoidance. American bomber crews, once hesitant and anxious over deep penetration missions, now flew with relative assurance. The psychological edge was shifting decisively toward the Allies. The P-51 Mustang had fulfilled its promise. It provided not just protection, but control. The skies over Berlin, once a deadly gauntlet for unescorted bombers, were now dominated by disciplined formations of Mustangs dictating the tempo of combat. The combination of human skill, tactical innovation, and technological superiority had created a turning point in the air war.